Welcome to Insights Unlocked podcast. I'm Nathan Isaacs, Senior Manager for Content Production at User Testing. And joining us today as host is User Testing's Leah Hogan, Principal for Experience Research Strategy. Welcome, Leah.
Hi, Nathan.
And our guest today is Ashley Budd. Ashley is the Senior Director of Advancement Marketing at Cornell University. She is among the most influential voices in education marketing and fundraising. Ashley is author of the popular newsletter, Ashley in Your Inbox, and co-author of the new email marketing book, Mailed It, a guide for crafting emails that build relationships and get results. Welcome to the show, Ashley.
Hi, Nathan. Hi, Leah.
I'm thrilled to have you on the show because I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since we first met. So I guess where we'll get started is kind of where it is that I first met you, which is I was privileged to get to see you speak at the High Ed Web Michigan Regional Conference. And I thought your presentation was really compelling and thoughtful because you did a really elegant job of connecting customer insights, so both quantitative and qualitative research, to really tangible design principles, choices in the space of language. And that's something that I think a lot of people really can get better at, at doing. And so, where I really wanted to start is just why is it so important to connect the dots?
Yes. And so the presentation that you saw was about trying to get people to read email. And I think if we go even kind of bigger than that, it's how our organizations build relationships with people. And I'm a marketer, right? So I'm thinking about all the ways that we can do this. But I know, like you said, from asking people and also from seeing the quantitative results coming through, that this email channel that's super noisy and hard, and like not the most wonderful place to be all the time, is the place where they want communication and email. And so it's like this really interesting contradictory problem that I was interested in. And I think I found what makes sense to me. So I'm excited to kind of unpack that. But the thing that made me feel good in a really disruptive technology space was that email was such a steadfast piece of tech. That the people who developed this in the late 60s, they got a lot of things right that we needed. Like, we needed a space for a subject line so that we could keep these things organized, and we needed a space for a message, and it would be cool if we could share files, and like all of these kind of like really core things has made the channel really like it's now, I think of it as our communication utility. Because if I can be a communication nerd for a second, like the mailbox, right, served a really important space. Like the actual post mail was where we got all the important information for me growing up. Like I got my college acceptance through a letter in the mail. Now that's email, right? And so like we've made this shift where like doctors' notes and government, and the more adulting you do, the more you have to be in email. So that made me feel good about the channel. That it's not dead, but it's really a different place than when I first started working in it. And I think that's where some of the tactics that the user experience world understands are some of the tactics that I was excited to kind of apply to email and see them work.
Yeah. And I think, experience touches everything, right? It's digital products, it's physical spaces, it's services as well. But actually, I thought one of the fascinating parts of some of the work that you've been doing to optimize email really come from designing a trust triangle. And I'd love to hear you just talk a little bit more about like what the trust triangle is and how you came to the conclusion that those elements were the most important thing to make email effective.
Love the trust triangle. It's my favorite model for trust building because it's simple and it's easy for me to remember. And a triangle, you're taught in geometry, right? It's this really sturdy shape. And, but again, what I learned in uncovering this more is that, so the trust triangle was introduced to me by Frances Frye and Ann Morris. They wrote an article that was in the Harvard Business Review in 2020. And I was introduced to that in an interpersonal leadership context, how to build trust with colleagues, how to build trust in an organization, but I couldn't help myself and apply it to a marketing context because this was so simple. And the triangle is that, what Ann Morris and Frances Frye say is that there are 3 core drivers of trust: authenticity, empathy, and logic. And they didn't, this is not something that they came up with necessarily. They tested it and wrote a very elegant article, but this is also Aristotle. This is ethos, pathos, logos. It's the same principle. So like we can believe this is a longstanding theory, right? So these 3 core drivers of trust, they say, if we think about it in a triangle, that you can kind of pinpoint when you don't trust a person. And they will call it the wobbly triangle when there's like distrust in a relationship. And this really clicked for me in that interpersonal context when I was, if you think about someone who you don't trust, why don't you trust them? If it's on the authenticity side, it might be that you don't think the person's being honest with you. Like there's something about the way that they're carrying themselves or the way that they're saying the things. They might be saying them very confidently and very logically, but you know that they're like, I don't really believe what you're saying. And that might be why you don't believe them. And on the empathy side, maybe they're being honest with you, but you don't believe that they're invested in your success. So you don't trust them because they're not looking out for you. And then the last piece, the logic side, and this is the one that hit home for me when I was thinking about a colleague that I was working with that I don't trust, and I'm not going to name names, but this person, most authentic person, brings her whole self to work. Most empathetic person wants to see me succeed, but I do not know how this person makes their decisions. And that's the logic side. And if I don't have that, like, I just can't trust you. I don't know how you came to that conclusion. So you have to bring me along in your thinking to have a really strong relationship, really strong trust triangle. And so those are kind of the core principles in thinking about relationship building with people. And I love applying it to the email space because we are in a place where people are making this decision in a split second, whether or not they trust your email. And they really want to not trust it because they really want to delete it. Right? Like I'm looking at my inbox right now. I actually only have 5 emails unread in my inbox right now. That's like remarkable for a Wednesday. But all I want to do is delete them and make it 0. Right? So if you're in this mindset of like, I just want to know whether this is something I need to invest in, that is just such an important part of thinking about all the components of what you're communicating. Am I doing it in a way that's helping to build trust with someone and not lose it? Because otherwise it's that hard to delete.
Yeah. And then, I think what I love about the elegance of that trust triangle is there are tangible outcomes that you're really trying to drive that you can track using, a number of KPIs. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about like, how do you connect the KPIs that you're trying to drive to some of these principles that you understand through or represent through that trust triangle?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think about it in terms of, am I getting people to pay, or am I getting people to engage with this stuff? Right? Do they trust me enough that they want to spend a couple minutes with me in their inbox? And I also think about it in terms of that, like measurable unsubscribe, measurable, like, I do not trust you, I want nothing to do with you kind of metric. And so I think the helpfulness really on the front end, maybe if you're thinking about how do I increase engagement in email, it's probably in these markers of authenticity and empathy. I mean, we can point to any of them, but am I showing up and being honest, right? Is the from name actually coming from if you're using a person's name, is it really coming from that person? Like, people can see right through that immediately, right? Like, no, Kamala, you're not emailing me right now, right? But like, I would want to know who the person in your headquarters who's like scrambling right now, who like really needs my help. How much like more honest and authentic does that feel? So who's it coming from for real? Are we saying things in our subject lines that like, this is the most exciting rollout ever? Is it? Right? Like, is it exciting?
It might be for you.
Yeah. Like, is this really going to be a quick survey, or is it going to take more than a couple of minutes? Right. So like, how honest are we being? I think that is a really good example of like right there in your from name and in your subject line. Can people test, like, if people can like poke it and say like, no, you're not being honest. You're just giving them an excuse to say like, oh, I don't trust her. I don't, this is not, they're trying to trick me. I don't want to be tricked here. And then inside, I think if you get somebody to read your email, right, one of my favorite tactics for reducing unsubscribes is to be really honest in your communication about your frequency of communication and what you're sending people. And one of the things that we do in almost every email that we send, and we send a ton of email to Cornell alumni. Every time I meet one in the wild, I'm like, hi, it's me. I'm sending you all the email. But we have these PS statements that say like, are we too much for your inbox? Let's put this on pause for 6 months, right? Can you not make a gift to the university right now? We understand. Let's not keep sending you these kinds of things. And that kind of like self-aware, empathetic approach to what we're putting in around, just like, instead of just the here, unsubscribe and you rage quit, right? You rage click and you rage quit. Like, how can we incorporate some of these more human, softer pieces of language in there to get people to understand where we're coming from and meet them where they are?
Yeah. And I think, it's so funny. Earlier today, I was going through some old mail, and very old mail from the 60s, and ran across an alumni letter from Cornell University that is almost 40 years old.
Wow.
And I thought, about our conversation today, and just thinking, 40 years ago, it was a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
And the choice was, do I throw the piece of paper out, or do I keep it and, send, or, send a donation in, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really fascinating to me to just think about the trends and how it is that we communicate, and how we learn as we go to make sure that we're keeping that communication fresh and, consistent with the best practices of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So this is my long way of asking, how do you do that? How do you make sure that your communications are really staying in front of, the current trends, or actually sometimes even setting the standard for what that is? Because, your success is pretty I would say impressive compared to your peer institutions.
Yeah, we are doing something differently. I will acknowledge that. And I consult with other colleges and universities and other nonprofits. And a lot of times they'll ask me to do communications audits. And what I see is that we're doing a lot of asking to do things. And why people want to stay in a relationship with you is not to get asked to do things all the time. Right? Like, it's got to be two-way. And so I, again, will point to that trust triangle and say, where's the empathy in this relationship? Where are we helping our audience be more successful? And the fun thing I like to say to colleges and universities, especially who are communicating with alumni, and I'll say it about parents and prospective students too, to a certain extent, but like, we are a very insignificant part of these people's lives. Right? And so we have to think about what they're doing in their life and how do we insert ourselves into that conversation. And when we think about what are they going through in this moment of life, how can we be helpful? How can we, in doing that and connecting our priorities in that way, that's how we stay relevant. And so there's some things that I think, I teach about in the newsletter space of like freeing ourselves from these newsletter templates that are like alumni news, campus update, this kind of stuff that is not important to me on a Wednesday when you're like, I'm trying to delete my emails, right? What is important to me? Take some pre-planning. Usually at this time of year, I'm telling teams they should be time traveling to the holidays. Like, we got to be thinking right now in the summertime, what do people need at the end of the year? So you have enough time to be there where they are and not be in this kind of reactive mode. But what do people need around the holiday season? They need financial advice. They need gift ideas. They need these things that you might not think to tell them from your organization's point of view. But boy, when you land in my inbox and you're like, the perfect gift for your teen, right at the time when I need it, I'm happy that my alma mater, pointed me to the bookstore with that coupon. So I like that. It's all of that kind of content is helping to nurture the relationship. It could be helping to steward a relationship that already exists. And I feel like that's the stuff that's really missing in a lot of our organizational communication. That's the same reason I stay subscribed to other brands, right? Because they're going to send me a coupon, or I'm going to hear about the sale, or I'm going to, why am I staying on these other lists? It's usually because there's something in it for me, and not because I'm going to get asked to buy a bunch of stuff. It's not on that end.
Yeah. And, that's, I think, a really powerful point, because I think what struck me as you were just, answering that last question was really the fact that a lot of these best practices apply in most customer experience contexts.
Right.
Like, authenticity needs to happen when you're buying a pair of shoes, right? Like, are they going to fit? Are they going to last? And just being able to really have an understanding of that role that your brand plays in someone's life and anticipate how that fits.
Yeah.
Is such a powerful thing. And then also tracking those metrics and KPIs to just see how effective are we actually being.
Yeah.
That's, I think, putting all of those elements together so elegantly.
Yeah. Can we spoil a few other tips from the book?
Absolutely.
That I think your audience will love to hear. So there's two other things. I think, there's lots in the book, but my favorite parts of the book is that there's a whole bunch of science to back up why these tactics work. But there's some really tactical steps to get you from, what exactly does that from name need to be? What do I put in my subject line and my pre-headers? But once you get inside the email, we're really advocating for simple language. And that means a 7th to 9th grade reading level, something that's really easy for people to consume in their very first pass, because we know the majority of your audience is just going to skim this to try to understand what's going on. The very first thing that they're going to do, if they open it, which we're going to clear that hurdle because you're going to do the from line and the subject line, right? But once they open it, their eyes are going to do this 2-second skim before they even know. And what the book shows you is exactly where their eyes are going to go, so that you can put your message right there and they're not going to miss it. And you're going to use really super simple language so that they don't have to read it more than once. And that's just going to make people feel good. They understand what you're trying to tell them. And I think one of the most frustrating parts about our email inbox right now is that we're just opening these things and we're like, oh, what is this? What is this thing? What is this next? And it's really challenging, and we get more frustrated. So when your brand is the one who comes in and we know exactly what it is that you want us to do, we understand it because we're using simple language and we're kind of hijacking these reading patterns in a way, then we're going to see results just from those really simple those simple things. So that's another, we've got 2 email templates on our website, emailbook.co, where you can see exactly where the eyes will go and where to put your stuff. And lots of fun tips like that I know any of your user experience friends are going to love to see, because we stole most of them from web, and we're applying them to email, and it turns out it works here too.
And it's great to hear that, just because I think people understanding that these design principles really carry through to so many contexts takes
Yes.
down the temperature a little bit around the, are we doing the right things, right? These
Yeah.
principles really do work across platforms. I love that.
Yay.
Well, I want to ask one last question, which is really around, and of course, this is what everybody's thinking about these
Mm-hmm.
days. How do you see artificial intelligence? I mean, LLM, right?
Mm-hmm.
Large language models are all about language, right?
Yeah.
How do you see that impacting what it is that you're doing? Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so we've been using what is available right now. Me and my co-author have been really messing with this. I think one thing that we'll say is that if you feel like you've been getting more emails than ever, you have. That is what's happening, and you're going to keep getting more emails, and that the ability to produce more content quickly with AI and LLMs is only going to exacerbate the amount of email that we get. So that's one way I'm thinking about it. Um, in terms of helping to write email, man, these GPTs really need our book, because they're not hacking the reading patterns, right? Like, they're not doing 7th to 9th grade reading level. Like, they're not using the techniques that they need to. So we're very skeptical of that. They'll do a pretty good job in simplifying language. If you say simplify the language, that can be really helpful if you're using a GPT. They're not good if you say use 7th to 9th grade reading level, though. Don't get that specific. They will give you something that comes out like a toddler. So it's still kind of pretty primitive in terms, I would say spend 3 hours reading the book rather than trying to get a GPT to make it do the work for you right now. But one of the other things I think is really super interesting in the email space is how the email service providers are going to help us sort through all of this volume. And one of the things that they're going to be checking is, does the from name and the subject line match the content of the email? And so we've really got to get away from trying to trick people into opening these emails. And that's been the tactic of email marketers for the last decade. How do I entice someone to open? That's going to get you sent right to junk or promotions. So we're going to have to be clearer. We're going to have to be more authentic. And I think that's a good thing for all of us. We're going to need to sound like humans. Yeah, I do think it will help us in a productivity sense of, and we're going to see more email volume because of that. We're also going to see more email filtering. So we're going to have to be a little bit more on top of tracking deliverability. I think not enough organizations really even know how to track whether they're getting in the inbox or whether they're stuck in spam, really. Promotions isn't as worrisome as just like really not delivering at all. And and I think watching your open rate is the one place to look to gauge whether that's really an issue. I've been saying 20% as like a pretty conservative open rate is one that anything 20% or below, I'm concerned, because I think that's all bots that are opening your emails, and that you're actually not getting to real humans if it's a 20, like hovering around 20%. That might be a little high. Maybe it's 15, but I really want to see people's open rates much higher. Otherwise, I think you're in the spam.
Well, that's really helpful, actually, to have like a clear
Yeah.
KPI to be looking at. And I think, to that end, just making sure, like, what you said actually surprised me, because the idea of relying on AI to more help you to manage your inbox versus
Yeah.
to write something, um,
Yeah.
is probably a strategy that works not only for email that's going out to large audiences, but even that one-on-one like how do you make your own emails to people?
Exactly. And that's what I think we'll see Outlook and Gmail and Yahoo creating these AI driven filters for us. So we're not going to have to implement our own. They're going to say, here's what we think these emails are about. And if we're really confusing as writers and we're saying something really cute in the subject line and we're using slang, and like the AIs are going to get so confused. So we might have to bend more to the whims of the robots who are doing the filtering just by being super clear, which is what's going to work no matter what, right? If people have 2 seconds to like filter through and understand what's in your email, just tell them what's in the email. Just be super to the point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, along with that, are there any like final thoughts that you would want to share with folks as they're thinking about writing better email communications?
Yeah, I think that we hit on them. Thinking about how everything you're doing is building a trusting relationship. Are we being as honest and authentic in our communication as we can be? Nobody's going to be able to poke holes in anything that we're saying. Are we thinking about how we can be helpful to the reader? And that might just be keeping it short, right? Like, how can we make this as short as possible so that we're not wasting their time? We're just going to give them a short, simple message. That could also be one of the counterintuitive things, might be taking a long email. Maybe you have a newsletter that's 4 sections. Maybe that should be 4 short emails instead, because it's easier for somebody to get through. And it's less overwhelming to look at 4 in 2 seconds than one that's going to make me stop and have to unpack 4 things. So I think it's making those little decisions about what is really the most helpful thing for the reader on the other end, knowing that they're in this space where they're wanting to move pretty quickly. They want to clear things out.
Yeah. Yeah. That's all of those are such powerful points. And I think that I'll be using them myself as I write better emails too. So thank you again so much for being on the show. I'm thrilled that we got to have this conversation and I really enjoyed it too.
Me too.
And before we wrap, can you share a little bit of information about your upcoming book release
Yeah.
and how can people stay in touch with the work that you're doing?
Wonderful. Yes. So the book will be available August 20th, everywhere you can get a book. We're excited. It's straight to paperback. It's a real easy read. Nobody wants to read more than 3 hours about email. So we packed it in, very enjoyable. You can find more information about the book. You can get the email templates and the resources that we share on our website. It's emailbook.co. So some simple to follow. We do have an email list there if you want to stay in touch with my co-author, Diana Kibbolds, and I. And then I also have an email newsletter for nonprofit marketers, other digital geeks out there that like to follow digital marketing trends. And you can find that newsletter at my website, which is ashleybud.com. Also very active on LinkedIn these days. So if you want to find me on LinkedIn and connect, that would be wonderful.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again. And Nathan, I'll hand it off to you.